It's the year 2019. Rumors of a League of Legends fighting game fills you with excitement and potential. The game with an IP alone is enough to get you and your friends talking. The same friends who have been seeing the hope of the fighting game scene growing despite the growth suffering of lockdown during COVID-19, and everyone says this game's too big to fail. Riot's gonna save the FGC. Trust in Riot Games. Project L's officially teased, and we finally see the light. Flash forward to the year 2026, and that light is now 2XKO. But it's dimming. Close to turning off because that's exactly what's happening. Riot announces their plans to shut down development on 2XKO, and the last set of content will be released before December, where the game will only have servers on. Some friends have been lost due to the time and pandemic, but you're still here, and now you hear from everyone that 2XKO was doomed to fail, the marketing was not it, the name was the worst decision, and the numbers didn't meet demand. I've given my reaction to the news, which you can see if you click on the banner, but let's actually talk about what the events and explain why 2XKO failed. Before we start, I just want to set some ground rules that while I'll do my best effort to research everything, this is just my opinion and should be treated as such. Let's be respectful in the comments and be mindful that humans' lives were and are impacted by this news. With that being said, let's hop in. Before we start the breakdown, I think we need to understand in segments why 2XKO failed. In order to do so, I've separated the reasons into 3 categories: marketing, audience, and expectations. I think it's important that we understand that 2XKO shutting down is not sourced to one reason, but a result of multiple factors that impacted the game. Marketing is a factor, but it's related to the audience in which 2XKO was introduced to, and the expectations that were set out for it. With that being said, let's actually start with the expectations. Remember that for a good amount of time, the FGC was hearing about 2XKO as the rumored project that Riot Games was spending time to invest in. These rumors were strongly supported by the fact that Riot was officially expanding into multiple media, such as game, television, and even music. Riot was literally investing millions of dollars to acquire studios like Fortiche to create Arcane, and spending more money to bring in high-profile music artists to really expand on the League of Legends IP. And right in the heart of 2019, we saw more than just confirmation of Project L, which at the time was 2XKO's initial project-based name. We had gotten announcements that included Wild Rift, the mobile version of League, Legends of Runeterra, which was the digital card game. More on this in a sec, by the way. This is going to be important to note. Project A, which turned out to be Valorant, and Project F, which set out to be an MMO. Riot Games had also announced Riot Forge as a publishing label that was going to pick up and create games separate from the IP but expand on the narrative. From this publishing force, we got Ruined King, Tale of Nunu, and even a supposed tabletop game first called Tellstone's King's Gambit. This was literally the peak of Riot Games, and it was supposed to be a positive sign of the prosperous times that were to come. Everyone said the same thing. Riot Games was too big to fail. League of Legends is too big for an IP just to stay as a MOBA forever. But then, the pandemic came. The world was literally halting, and studios have to spend extra resources to support their staff and projects in the remote environments. The time these projects were expanded to finish were massively underestimated due to COVID-19 shutdown and resources becoming way more expensive. Studios across the game industry were burning money as they struggled with project delays and issues that led to many delayed game announcements. Investors and studios were asking at one point where were the projects that they had spent millions into, while the dev teams constantly worked on all around the clock hours. Some were contracted, some were salaried, but all burnt out from the demand to finish their respective project pipeline. And that was just COVID working against them. Riot had previous controversies before the pandemic in relation to the many issues of sexual harassment and bro culture workspace. Riot had to shift completely their personnel, including dealing with lawsuits from employees, player base, and even the government. There were multiple instances where the company itself was in the limelight because of the Hong Kong protests being discouraged on esports broadcasts, George Floyd being ridiculed by Ron Johnson, who was at the time global head of consumer products, and even controversies regarding their own close practices with advertising the latest character Seraphine as too close to comfort for her own origins. Let's face it, Riot Games had a messy history, and the expansions into the new mediums were supposed to be a sign of change. And, well, leadership changed too. After Jillian Jadeja entered the CEO seat in 2023, right in January 2024, the layoffs began. 11% of the layoffs were coming from Riot Forge because the publishing label was being sunsetted. And the reason? Shifting focus to long term and on the players that they had already retained. In addition to that, Legends of Runeterra was fully announced that the PvP development team was reduced, with the focus of now being PvE as primary due to the financial sustainability. Card advanctions would stop, staff working on the game would be downsized, and the game that was so successful with the free-to-play business model and awarded multiple awards was now shifted to just barely keeping the lights on. And the projects that stayed alive? 2XKO, Valorant, and the rumored Project F. Additionally, while there were reports of a platform fire, the failure of Multiverses, which announced their closure a year after release in 2025, played a factor that Riot Games was not ready to invest again into another fighting game genre, and that their focus was going to be on Project L, which later became 2XKO. And as the audience, we all believed that 2XKO was still going to save the FGC. We were still seeing esports for League and Valorant dominate the competitive team. Updates were still being pushed out. And again, Riot still saved face in the massive of the wake of layoffs and that had impacted the industry. If anything, 2XKO was set with the expectation of just be good and release. And Project L quickly became known as 2XKO with Riot Games, starting the launch of their marketing with partnerships like Chipotle, various tournament events, and even opportunities to enter their Alpha Lab were all set up. We were finally getting the game, and it was being receptive. It was announced that the game was becoming a tag fighter, and then the trend of tag fighters was building up. Many of the dev teams were actually members of the community, and that meant that they loved fighting games, and it seemed like everything was going well. We are finally getting a game that was meant for the community, and relationships with Riot Games was becoming more accepting. As the studio was not looking to come in and sweep the genre, they were looking to acclimate it to it. 2XKO being free to play was also an attempt to finally say that fighting games were accessible. There was no price point, players would be able to unlock all the characters with credits and even playtime, and if they wanted to spend money, the skins were priced around such. Connection was going to be isolated to how good the person's internet was, meaning the infrastructure was going to be a leading staple into the new era of fighting games. This was literally the free-to-play model everyone was waiting for. And again, everyone was saying Riot Games is too big to fail. But then we finally got the product in our hands. A game that was so much time in development finally being released into closed beta in 2025 was here. 10 years of development led to this moment, and then the closed beta transitioned into early access for PC in October, skipping initial beta phases to begin the demand that the game was needed to set up. Downloads needed to be guaranteed, skins and characters needed to be bought. PC, while in big demand for the community, was where a lot of that release was done, but the majority of players of the fighting game community actually were on console, and the game was only accessible by installing the Riot launcher. These factors led into a weak launch for 2XKO that forced their hand to prepare the console launch in the official Season 1 earlier this year, 2026. Meanwhile, content was coming in fast, with new characters like Warwick being revealed, followed by Caitlyn. And 2XKO was finally getting into the swing of things, and even with console launch in January, signaling the introduction to the console player base, everyone was on board to promote the game. The first sign, though, that something was wrong was the round of layoffs on February 9th, 3 weeks after 2XKO's console launch. The engagement from players were not meeting expectations, and while the numbers were growing and the audience was there, the momentum was not enough to support the team's size. 10 years the teams were together, and now many of them were let go with 6-month severance and opportunities to transition into other roles with the company if it made sense for them. Despite the amazing content produced and the growing competitive scene, it was not enough. And then now, in August 20th, 2XKO was announced that the development was going to end and servers were to remain online. The expectations set for the game, which we can only assume was to be in the hundreds of thousands, was not enough to meet those. Something to highlight here is that while expectations must have been exponentially high, it's not a surprise. Looking at the budget and the amount that must have been placed to invest in 2XK alone, Riot Games was expecting their League player base to hit 2XKO immediately and see growth well past 3 months, even if it meant that player attention could be less than a month. 10 years means that more than hundreds of thousands of dollars were invested into the game, team, and overall existence, that in those 10 years was not a single return. There was no guarantee in downloads to offset expectations and adjust, and the game was still stuck in development hell even after the end of the pandemic. Riot Games also had switched leaderships and stakeholders plenty of times in those very same 10 years, that at this point, leadership was probably like, well, we need something at this time to show where our investment went for. And the expectation for 2XKO was just too great, and the audience for it just too small to support. Which actually leads me to the next factor, the audience. 2XKO was heavily focused on the FGC as the fighting game to exist. Its free-to-play model was in high demand as many members were looking for a AAA fighting game that would not cost $60+ and the content was given for rewards as playtime. This model is one that was working for League, and if anyone could do it, it would have to be Riot Games. Even in the face of multiverses, many were pointing to gameplay mechanics, melee players not wanting to switch to other games, and just the overall grind to get characters and content was just not there. But other games like Granblue were offering free-to-play versions with rotating characters, but there would have still had to been a purchase to get the game to get the full experience. But where a game like Granblue succeeds and 2XKO struggled with is that fighting game players don't want to spend money on skins and new content. Let me break it down for you further. Let's take a streamer like Kai Cenat. Kai has CCV of 150,000, and for the purpose of this video, this is just numbers being thrown out and are not subject to accuracy. Out of those 150,000 viewers, only 5% are actually gifting subs and spending money actively in his stream. That's about 7,500 of those people, while only 1% is actually spending money and purchasing his merch, sponsored products, and anything else that he's promoting. That's only 75 people actively using their money outside of the Twitch platform. So how does this relate to 2XKO? Well, take a streamer like Diaphone or Sajam, or any streamer you love in the FGC that you watch on a daily basis. Their numbers are significantly lower than Kai's, essentially under the 10,000 mark. And if we make it equivalent and use the same percentage of numbers of 5%, for example, 5% of those are gifting subs when the streamer plays 2XKO. And only 1% will actually make a purchase or download the game. Then, realistically, streamers alone probably only brought less than 5% of people who actually downloaded the game. We have more people who are interested in watching the game than actually downloading and playing it. And this is even further proven when you look at the Twitch numbers, where 2XKO held the highest CCV was when you had bigger streamers like Diaphone and Sajam streaming the game, or when you had big events like EVO pushing the game on the competitive side. Some of you might actually use this and be like, haha, so Twitch comparison numbers are relevant. And others might be, well, Twitch numbers don't matter. In most instances, it's true. Twitch numbers are really not that relevant, but we're also talking about the same company who has 2 other games with hundreds of streams broadcasting these very same games and maintaining a viewership. This is also not accounting for the fact that the game is also a featured game on TikTok and still does not have the same amount of people watching or streaming as their other 2 games. 2XKO was not hitting anyone's feed or attention unless they were in the fighting game community. The audience was strictly for the FGC. The problem is that connecting this to why we talk about engagement and audience is that a fighting game player can spend over 200 hours of playtime and watch time, but they'll not make the move to purchase or spend money. The FGC is a community that is large, yes, and brings a lot of eyes, but that's it. It's not enough to maintain a retention that equals in a return or profit. So when we talk about the expectations from the suits at Riot, of course they're not going to be momentum that met expectations. Where games like Fortnite continue to thrive off their free-to-play model, they have a gameplay loop that makes people want to spend money. They can and have catered to different IPs in an attempt to bring new unique users while also profiting off their current users. 2XKO had only one chance to do that, and that was with Arcane 3 years ago. If 2XKO had launched in the presence of Arcane, the many people who had invested into watching the show would have hopped into 2XKO instead of League, because then you had characters that were accessible and easily connected, unlike the MOBA. Instead, 2XKO launched way too late with a roster that was half Arcane and half League. The skins that were created, yes, were beautiful, but they meant nothing if a user was not interested in the character. Many times it's been said that players were not interested in trying 2XKO or not staying with the game because they didn't have a character they could connect with, having never played League and with very few actually watching Arcane. The point that a 10-year-old game not meeting expectation makes 100% sense, because the expectations that were set were not keeping the FGC in mind. It was about keeping business models in mind. Which is why when we talk about marketing and how this game didn't have the best marketing in mind, well, it didn't, because the audience that was needed was not in the focus. I really want to stress in this part that no one can really say it was good or bad marketing, because truthfully, the success of a product is more than just simply promoting it. Marketing in its own form is so much more than posting an area like socials and simply promoting it. Marketing is actually where you can see socials and communication be 100% positive and successful, but the real performance of the product could be just as bad. There's really no true way to say, hey, this product failed because marketing failed, because it doesn't exist. And it's why this point is the last point in this video. It only accounts, in my opinion, only 10% of the reason why 2XKO did not succeed. 2XKO was promoted as the game for the FGC, from the team speaking with tournament organizers, meeting with various players and creators of different sizes, and even the team coming from the community itself. But as beautiful and promising initiative this was, it was also its doom. During Closed Alpha Lab 2, I made a video talking about what audience 2XKO is trying to cater to. Was it trying too hard to meet the competitive demand, or was it trying to welcome new players to the genre? The game featured input simple controls, but realistically had concepts that were just too overwhelming for someone coming into the game brand new. Even the game's duo mechanic were not enough to sustain or encourage people to actively pair up, while the differences in views was not enough to stop meta gameplay. The game even fit the fighting game demand, but it just wasn't there for the casual audience. The same issue persisted in full release, and balancing became centered around competitive sentiments while trying to balance casual audience. And if you don't think that's the case, Patrick Miller, who was the team lead for 2XKO, especially for balancing gameplay, even admits in a recent Patreon post the following: "My job is to figure out how to make an awesome fighting game. Making it profitable is someone else's job. I'd rather make an interesting failure than a boring success. Why not? The worst thing that happens is that we all get fired." These points show that the goal wasn't to make it profitable, it was to make it a solid product that the FGC could depend on. And again, the product is great, but look at the cost. People lose their jobs, the game stops completely, and as one of the biggest studios that sets an example for the industry, now has been proven that investing into fighting games for a free-to-play model just doesn't work. And even in the post, the former team lead expresses that taking risks weren't really a risk. Again, the worst outcome was getting fired, not about creating a failure that would set one of the most expected games from an IP too big to fail. Any attempt to get streamers to actually play the game utilizing Twitch tools were met with scrutiny, and rightfully so, as incentives were met with gift subs and not actual paid sponsorships. And while the Chipotle partnership was so cool and exciting, it wasn't enough to make sustainable and promote new users. 2XKO was just not big enough to meet with its other siblings in terms of IP because it was so focused on being the perfect fighting game. It's one of those instances where the game was just too perfect. And some will say, but the name! You could have put it in the Riot launchers. You could have done XYZ. Again, sure, there's some reason to that, yeah. But again, it's not a huge detrimental factor. Because regardless if more money was put in, the name changed and was promoted harder into the native league's ecosystem, the game was never going to be meant for people who love the League IP. It was meant for fighting game players, and that was not going to change. And so, we're now here. 2XKO's next patch is hopefully slated for September, with Lux's release followed by Samira. The current team that is staying on to close the doors is working hard to ensure we get as much of the finished product as possible before December. Many of Riot's refunds were already refunded and are set to be followed with more. And 2XKO will remain alive thanks to the server, and if it's anything like it is in Legends of Runeterra, it's just essentially keeping the lights on and maintaining connection to maintenance. But the dream of a free-to-play fighting game ends with 2XKO. The great 2XKO experiment is ended, and if there's anything to learn from this, is that the game was truly special. It brought all the right things, but it just did not meet the right expectations. There's a positive to this though, and I hope those of you who are watching take a moment to reflect that the game lives on with the community. The community is what makes any game, and for the FGC, 2XKO will be no different. If you love this game with everything you enjoy, then keep playing it. It's a special title that no one will ever take away from you or anybody who loves the game, and if you truly love it. To the 2XKO team, thank you so much for creating a fighting game that will always have my heart forever, and of course we'll still be seeing you on your next journey wherever they may go. Thanks for watching, Muse, and I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from and understand a little bit more about the state of things. Bye-bye.